We didn't put you in the wedding party. Your relationship status makes the photos complicated. That is what my mother said to me at 9:47 in the morning on the day of my sister's wedding, in the main hall of Magnolia Ridge Estate in Savannah, Georgia, with four bridesmaids in blush satin, a photographer adjusting her lens 3 feet away, and the venue coordinator standing close enough to hear every word. I was 24 years old. I had driven 6 hours the night before. I had a bridesmaid dress hanging in a garment bag in my car, which no one had told me to return. I smiled at my sister Cassidy, told her she looked beautiful, and I took a seat in the third row from the back. I did not cry. I did not make a scene. I sat with my hands folded, and I watched my family arrange themselves in front of me like a painting I had been edited out of. What I did not tell anyone that morning, what I had never told a single person in my life, was that 2 months earlier, I had quietly covered $8,700 to keep that wedding venue from canceling the event entirely, and I had done it under a reference number that no one would ever trace back to me. I thought that secret would stay buried forever. I was wrong. 14 months later, a retired venue owner put a handwritten thank you note in an envelope and mailed it to my home address. And my sister opened it at a family brunch before I could get to it first. I want to tell you exactly what happened next. And I want you to hear it the way it actually happened, because the truth does not need embellishment. Before I go on, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely connect with this story. And drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. I always love seeing where you're all listening from. My name is Kayla Renee Dobbins. I am 26 years old, and this is the story of the most quietly consequential thing I have ever done in my life. I grew up in Macon, Georgia, the middle child of three, sandwiched between my older brother Drew and my younger sister Cassidy. My mother, Sandra Dobbins, had a specific talent for organizing her love according to what was convenient for her at any given moment. She was not a cruel woman in any dramatic sense. She was the kind of woman who could make you feel subtly wrong about yourself without ever raising her voice. The kind who would say something devastating and then act bewildered if you named it later. She managed her household and her relationships like a project portfolio, always identifying which investment was performing and which one was underperforming and adjusting accordingly. I had been with my girlfriend, Petra Langley, for almost 3 years by the time of Cassidy's wedding. Petra is quiet and precise. She works in environmental compliance for a consulting firm based in Midtown Atlanta, and she reads dense nonfiction on weekends for entertainment, which is the most specific thing I can tell you about the kind of person she is. My mother had never acknowledged Petra as a real part of my life. She referred to her, when she had to refer to her at all, as Kayla's friend. She had done this for 2 years and 8 months. That is how long it took them to decide Petra did not count. Cassidy's engagement to Marcus Tillman had been announced in the spring of the year before the wedding. I was genuinely happy for her. Cassidy and I had never been close in the way some sisters are, but we were not adversarial. She was 3 years younger than me, still orbiting our mother's approval in a way I had mostly stopped doing around age 19. When she called to tell me about the engagement, I congratulated her and meant every word. What I did not anticipate was how quickly the planning would become a mechanism for ranking everyone in our family according to my mother's current preferences. The bridal party was announced in a group text, 3 college friends of Cassidy's and our cousin Leanne. My name was not in the message. I texted Cassidy privately to ask if there had been a mistake. She replied 12 hours later with a message that read, "Mom thought it would be less awkward given the +1 situation." I stared at that sentence for a long time. The +1 situation. Petra was not a +1 situation. She was the person I came home to every single night. But I did not argue. I told Cassidy I would be there. I booked a hotel room. I took 2 days off from my job as a clinical research coordinator at Piedmont Healthcare. And I prepared myself to attend my sister's wedding as a guest. Then, in the middle of February, 8 weeks before the wedding, Cassidy called me sounding genuinely frightened. Her joint account with Marcus had been flagged for a disputed transaction from a contractor they had used for their apartment renovation. The bank had frozen both their accounts while the investigation proceeded, and the expected timeline was 6 to 8 weeks. The Magnolia Ridge venue deposit had a balance of $8,700 due by March 7th, or the booking would be released to another client. Cassidy had called my mother first, who told her she had already paid for the catering and could not cover the shortfall. She had called Marcus's parents, who were funding the honeymoon, and declined. She called me last. I had $4,012 in my savings account. I had a credit card with a $2,000 limit and approximately $1,100 in checking. I was 2 months into actively paying down a student loan. I told Cassidy I would see what I could do, and I got off the phone. What I did next, I did not discuss with anyone, not even Petra. I called Magnolia Ridge Estate directly and spoke with the office manager, a woman named Harriet Bloom. I explained that I wanted to make an anonymous payment toward a booking without the booking party being aware of the source. Harriet, who had managed that venue for more than 30 years, listened without interrupting and then said, "We assign payment reference numbers for exactly this kind of arrangement. It will appear in our internal records but not on the client invoice." I transferred my savings. I put the remainder on my credit card. The total transaction took approximately 40 minutes from first call to confirmation. I asked Harriet to direct any future correspondence to my Atlanta address, not to Cassidy's file. She confirmed she understood. Then I went back to my regular Tuesday afternoon, which included a 4-hour data review for an oncology trial, and I did not mention the payment to anyone, ever. The months between the payment and the wedding were not dramatic. I want to be honest about that because I think the most important things in life are often not dramatic in the moment. I went to work, I submitted my clinical data reports, I met Petra for dinner at our regular Thursday spot, a Thai place on Peachtree called Lotus Order, and we split the crispy tofu and talked about her fieldwork and did not discuss my family. I was not carrying the payment as a burden. I had made a decision based on what I believed was right, and I had set it down. That is, I think, the only way to do a genuinely selfless thing. You do it, you confirm it was done correctly, and then you stop thinking about it. The alternative, which is to carry your generosity around like a claim ticket waiting to be redeemed, is not generosity. It is an investment with delayed payout. I was not owed anything. I had paid because I did not want my sister's wedding to be ruined by a banking freeze that was not her fault. That was the full extent of my reasoning. The wedding itself was April 19th. I wore a gray wrap dress with a low heel. I drove down from Atlanta the day before and stayed at a Holiday Inn Express on Abercorn Street, which cost me $112 for the night. Petra stayed home because we both agreed, quietly and without argument, that bringing her would require energy I did not want to spend that weekend. She handed me a small folded note when I left our apartment that said, "Text me when you're there. Not call me if it gets bad. Not, I'm proud of you. Just, text me when you're there." I tucked it into my coat pocket and drove south. The morning of the wedding, I arrived at Magnolia Ridge at 9:15. I had been told the ceremony started at 11. I went in through the main entrance thinking I might see Cassidy and wish her well before everything got hectic. Instead, I walked into a room full of organized chaos. 4 women in blush satin dresses being arranged by a photographer, a florist making last adjustments to a centerpiece near the window, and my mother, Sandra Dobbins, standing in the center of the hall, in a champagne-colored mother of the bride suit, looking exactly as composed as she always did when she was about to say something she had already rehearsed. She walked toward me. I thought she was going to hug me. She did not. She said, at a volume that was not quite private and not quite public, exactly the words you heard at the beginning of this story. She said that my relationship status made the photos complicated. The photographer paused. 2 of the bridesmaids exchanged a look. The venue coordinator, a young woman with a clipboard, went very still. My Aunt Patricia, who had been standing near the florals on the far side of the room, turned her head slowly and said nothing. But she did not look away. She watched. I want you to sit with that sentence for a moment. My relationship status makes the photos complicated. I was 24 years old and I was being told that who I loved was a logistical inconvenience, not a moral objection, not even a family disagreement, a compositional problem. I had been edited out of my sister's photographs because I was aesthetically inconvenient. That is how precisely my mother had done it. She had turned a rejection into an aesthetic preference. She had made it feel almost reasonable. And that is the part that stayed with me the longest. I looked at Cassidy, who was across the room in her dress. She met my eyes for exactly 2 seconds and then looked at the floor. She knew. She had known when she sent that text about the +1 situation. She had known, and she had not pushed back, and she had not warned me, and she had let me drive 6 hours to walk into that room unprepared. I am not saying she is a villain. I am saying she made a choice. There is a difference. But the difference matters less than you might expect when you are standing in the middle of a hall in Savannah, Georgia, holding your own exclusion in your hands. I congratulated my sister. I told her she looked beautiful, which was true. I took a seat in the third row from the back. My Aunt Patricia walked across the room without saying a word to anyone and sat down directly beside me. I returned to Atlanta on April 20th. I unpacked my bag, I put my gray dress in the dry cleaning pile, and I went to work on Monday morning like nothing had happened. My colleague Devin Parks, who sits at the desk across from mine and has never asked me a single personal question he did not have specific permission to ask, looked at me when I came in and said, "Good weekend?" I said, "Passable?" He nodded and turned back to his monitor. That was the entire conversation. I have always liked Devon enormously. The months that followed were ordinary in their surface texture. I filed my reports, I tracked my trial data. I went to Lotus Order on Thursdays. I paid down my credit card with the deliberate efficiency of someone who has made a calculation and is simply executing it. The $8,700 was cleared from my card by August. By September, I had rebuilt my savings to $6,000, which was more than I had started with. The payment had cost me time and discipline, but it had not cost me anything I could not recover. What it had cost Cassidy's family, though they did not know it, was nothing. The venue had been saved. The wedding had gone beautifully. The day had been everything my mother had wanted it to be. I was glad about that, specifically, in a way that I am still not entirely able to explain. I did not speak to my mother between April and October. She called twice. I let both calls go to voicemail. She left messages that were polite and newsy and made no reference whatsoever to the morning of the wedding. I did not call her back. I was not constructing a strategy. I simply had nothing to say to her that I was willing to say yet. I mentioned none of this to Cassidy, who texted me pictures from her honeymoon in Tulum and tagged me in a photo on her social media with a caption that read, "Wedding weekend with the family." I was not in the photo. I was not in any of the photos. That is a fact I am sharing without additional commentary because it does not require any. My Aunt Patricia called me in June. She said, "I was there that morning, Kayla. I want you to know I haven't forgotten what I saw." I told her I appreciated it. She said, "You handled yourself with more dignity than anyone in that room deserved." Then she asked me how my work was going and we talked about clinical research for 20 minutes, and she told me about her garden, which was apparently having a spectacular hydrangea season. Patricia had been a school principal for 27 years. She had seen every variety of human behavior, and she had developed over those decades a way of witnessing injustice that did not minimize it and did not amplify it beyond what it actually was. She simply named it, filed it, and kept her position. I had always admired that about her. I admire it more now. June of the following year, 14 months after the wedding, I was hosting a Sunday brunch at my apartment in Atlanta. It was the kind of gathering I had started doing irregularly, 6 or 7 people, good coffee, one egg dish, someone always bringing pastries from the bakery on Piedmont. My mother was there, which tells you we had moved back into a civil proximity that was not yet repaired but was no longer open conflict. Cassidy and Marcus were there. Petra was there, in her own home, in her own chair, being referred to as Petra for the first time by my mother, which had taken almost 4 years to achieve. Patricia was there because I had invited her specifically, because I wanted her in rooms where my family was present. I had learned that from watching her. The mail had arrived while I was still in the kitchen finishing the frittata. Petra had set the stack on the table near the entry, which is where I always put it. Cassidy was sitting closest to the entry. I did not think anything of it. I was not expecting anything significant in the mail. I was thinking about whether the frittata needed another 2 minutes. What I did not know was that Harriet Bloom, the office manager at Magnolia Ridge Estate, had retired in May. She had spent 41 years managing that venue. Her employer, the owner, was a man named Grayson Okafor, who was 73 years old and clearing out his files before transferring management to a new team. In clearing his files, he found the payment reference records. He found the note Harriet had made beside my payment number. Anonymous donor, daughter of the bride, correspondence directed to Atlanta address per request. He wrote me a handwritten thank you note on Magnolia Ridge letterhead. It was 4 sentences long. He wrote that he wanted me to know the gesture had not gone unnoticed by everyone, that Harriet had made certain of it before she left, and that he hoped I knew the day had been beautiful in part because of what I had done. He signed it Grayson Okafor, owner, Magnolia Ridge Estate, Savannah, GA. He included the original payment reference number and the transaction date. He mailed it to my home address, the Atlanta address I had given Harriet more than a year earlier. He did not know Cassidy would be sitting at my table when it arrived. Cassidy picked up the envelope because it was on the top of the stack, and she was curious the way people are when they see formal letterhead from a place that has meaning to them. She opened it because she saw the Magnolia Ridge logo on the back flap, and she thought probably that it was some kind of anniversary promotion or vendor survey. I came out of the kitchen with the frittata and set it on the table and looked up, and Cassidy was reading the letter. Her face had gone very still, not upset, just still, in the particular way a face goes still when it is processing something that requires recalibrating everything around it. I sat down. I did not say anything. I looked at Petra, who looked back at me with an expression that was careful and completely unreadable to anyone who did not know her. My mother was pouring coffee at the sideboard. Patricia was buttering a piece of toast. Neither of them had seen the letter yet. Cassidy looked up at me and said, "Kayla, did you pay the venue balance?" It was not a question, really. It was a statement she was offering me the chance to confirm. I said yes. I said I had done it in February before the wedding, after she called me about the bank freeze. She said, $8,700. I said yes. She said, "From your own account." I said yes. The room had gone quiet. Not tense, exactly. More like everyone had stopped moving in the same moment. My mother put down the coffee pot. She said, "What is this about?" Patricia set down her toast. She had, I think, understood what was happening before anyone else in the room. Her face did not change. She simply watched. Cassidy handed the letter to Marcus without saying anything. He read it. He passed it to my mother. My mother read it twice. I watched her face shift through several things that I am not going to characterize for you, because I do not think it is my place to narrate her internal experience. What I can tell you is what she said. She said, "You never said a word." She was not saying it admiringly. She was saying it as though the silence itself was some kind of reproach to her, as though the fact that I had kept it private was an accusation she had not been prepared for. She said, "You did this, and you never said a word, and I said what I said to you that morning." She was not asking for forgiveness. She was, I think, for possibly the first time in my experience of her, simply accounting, simply sitting with the arithmetic of what she had done versus what I had done and arriving at the number. I want to be very specific here. I was not looking for a moment. I was not waiting for an opportunity. The letter arrived because an elderly man was clearing his retirement files and had the grace to close an account properly. The moment happened because of Grayson Okafor and Harriet Bloom's integrity, not because of anything I had arranged. That distinction matters to me. I do not want credit for timing I did not engineer. But I will tell you what I said, which was this. I told my mother I had not done it for recognition. I told her I had done it because I did not want Cassidy's wedding to fall apart over a banking error, and that was the whole of my motivation. I told her that what she had said to me that morning was something I was still carrying, and that I was not ready to say it was resolved, and that I was not going to pretend otherwise. I said those things quietly, at my own table, over a frittata that was getting cold. I was not performing. I was just telling the truth. Patricia said one thing in that whole conversation. She said, "She's been carrying both things this whole time, Sandra. The money and the mourning." She said it to my mother directly, without apology or softening. Then she picked up her toast and continued eating it. That was all she said. It was enough. The weeks that followed were not a movie. There was no single conversation that repaired everything. There was no grand gesture from my mother that undid April 19th. What happened instead was quieter and more complicated, and I think, more honest. Cassidy called me 3 days after the brunch. She called from her car, I could tell from the echo, and she cried in a way that sounded like someone who had been holding something pressurized for a long time. She said, "I knew about the bridal party decision before it was announced, and I didn't push back because I didn't want the argument with Mom that weekend. And I have been sitting with that for 14 months. She was not asking me to absolve her. She was naming it. I told her I appreciated that she called. I told her it did not fix it, but that it mattered. We stayed on the phone for 40 minutes and did not solve anything, which is, I think, exactly the right way to handle a wound that old and that real. She is not redeemed in this story. But she is not a villain either. She is someone who made the easier choice when the harder one was available, and she had enough integrity to eventually say so. My mother and I have not had the full conversation yet. I am not going to pretend we have. She sent me a message in the week after the brunch that said, "I've been thinking about what Patricia said." That was the entire message. I read it 4 times and replied, "Me too." We have seen each other twice since then at family dinners. She uses Petra's name now, every time, in a way that feels deliberate. I am watching it. I am not rushing it. I do not think you can accelerate a reckoning that someone else has to arrive at on their own schedule. You can witness it. You can leave the door open. But you cannot push someone through it and then call what's on the other side forgiveness. I heard from Patricia in August. She told me that she had spoken to 3 of my mother's close friends about what had happened at the brunch. Not as gossip, but because 2 of them had asked her directly why she seemed distant from Sandra at a mutual friend's birthday dinner. She told them what she had seen at the venue that April morning, and she told them what the letter had contained. She said she did not editorialize. She just gave them the facts. I did not ask her to do that. I did not know she had done it until she told me. I am told that 2 of those women have been notably cooler toward my mother since. I did not engineer that. I am telling you it happened because it happened, not because it satisfies me in any particular way. Actually, that is slightly untrue. It does satisfy me. I am not going to lie to you about that. But it satisfies me because it happened honestly, not because I arranged it. I want to say something about the word revenge because I know it is the word people reach for when they hear a story like this. I was not looking for revenge. I genuinely was not. Revenge requires a plan and a target, and I had neither. I had a secret I thought would stay secret. A decision I had made out of love for my sister's day. and a quiet conviction that I did not need a seat at the front of that room to have contributed something real to it. What happened at that brunch was not revenge, it was an accounting. A very calm, very precise accounting, conducted by an old man cleaning out his files and a woman at the head of a table who told the truth when it was asked of her. That is not revenge. That is just what happens when you have been honest and patient, and you let time do the work you are not allowed to do yourself. On the Sunday after the brunch, when the immediate turbulence had settled into something more manageable, Petra made dinner at our apartment. Nothing elaborate. Roasted chicken, rice, a green salad. Patricia came. Devin and his wife Claudette came, because they had become the kind of friends who get called when things matter. We sat around our table in the evening light, which in Atlanta in late June comes through the west window and turns everything the color of pale honey, and we ate and talked about things that had nothing to do with any of this. Devin's daughter had just started walking. Claudette was applying to a paralegal program. Patricia's hydrangeas had apparently had a second spectacular season in a row. I sat at that table, and I thought about Magnolia Ridge Estate, about those wide plank oak floors and the jasmine on the garden wall, about the fact that I had paid for a room I was not allowed to stand in, and about the fact that the room I was sitting in now was mine entirely, chosen and built and belonging to no one's arrangement but my own. What would you have done if you had been at that brunch table and watched Cassidy read that letter? I am genuinely curious. I think about the other versions of that morning sometimes, the ways it could have unfolded differently, the things I might have said if I were a different kind of person. I think about that a lot. Leave me a comment if you want to tell me. I read all of them. I am still working on forgiveness, specifically the kind that does not require the other person to have fully earned it yet. I think it is the hardest project I have ever taken on. Harder than the credit card, harder than the 6-hour drive, harder than the smile I held in the main hall of Magnolia Ridge on April 19th while the photographer adjusted her lens and my mother walked away. I am not there yet. But I have not closed the door. I have left it exactly the way I found it. Open just enough to let the light in. Not so wide that I cannot close it again if I need to. Thank you for listening to this. I know it is a long story, and I am grateful you stayed for all of it. If it resonated with you, please subscribe and turn on notifications. A new story drops every day, and I have one coming up next that I think is going to stay with you. It involves a lease, a promotion, and a grocery receipt that changed everything. You are not going to want to miss it.